When the United States set off the first nuclear bomb, they thought they were the only ones with the ultimate weapon. They believed they were untouchable, but they were wrong. That explosion actually started a dangerous race, and today there are 10 countries that have successfully cracked the code and built the bomb. Some helped each other, some stole from each other. Almost all of them involved spies and betrayal, and secret alliances that the public was never supposed to know about. We are going to walk through the complete timeline of how these 10 nations raced against time and each other to build the deadliest technology on Earth. We will also look at the countries that came terrifyingly close and might be next on the list to build the nuclear weapon. The story actually begins in Germany in 1938. It was there that scientists first discovered nuclear fission. They realised that by splitting atoms, they could release a massive amount of energy through a chain reaction. This discovery terrified the scientific community. The following year, Albert Einstein sent a warning to the United States. He told the American government that the Nazis could potentially weaponize this new science. This warning kicked off the most expensive and secretive science experiment in history. The United States launched the Manhattan Project. This was a massive operation involving scientists from the US and the UK and Canada. They spent nearly 1% of the entire US GDP on this single goal. They were racing against the Germans, who they knew were working on their own program. However, the Germans were having much less success. Germany surrendered in May 1945, but the bomb was not ready yet. It wasn't until July 1945 that the world changed forever. President Harry Truman was at the Potsdam Conference with Joseph Stalin and Winston Churchill to decide the fate of post-war Germany. While he was there, he received a secret message. The Trinity test in New Mexico had been a success. The United States now possessed the power of the sun. President Truman decided to tell Stalin that the US had a new weapon of unusual destructive force. He expected Stalin to be surprised, but Stalin just nodded and said he hoped the US would make good use of it against Japan. Truman did not know that Stalin was already fully aware. The Soviet Union had spies embedded deep inside the Manhattan Project. Internally, Stalin was furious that the Americans had beaten him to the finish line. In August, the US dropped 2 bombs on Japan and ended the Second World War. But as the smoke cleared, a new race had begun. The Soviet Union became the second country to join the nuclear club. They had started their research as early as 1941. They became suspicious when they noticed that American and British scientists suddenly stopped publishing papers on nuclear physics. They realized the work had gone underground. After seeing the destruction in Japan, the Soviet program went into overdrive. They had stolen a massive amount of data from the Americans, but they had a problem. They were paranoid. They feared that American double agents might be feeding them bad math to sabotage them. Because of this, they did not fully trust the stolen designs. They used captured German scientists and did their own research to verify everything. They moved faster than anyone in the West expected. In 1949, the Soviets detonated the RDS-1 in Kazakhstan. The American monopoly was over. The Cold War arms race had officially begun. You might assume the third country would be the United Kingdom. After all, the British had been key allies to the United States. They had actually done much of the early groundwork with a project called Tube Alloys. They handed all their research over to the US during the war under the Quebec Agreement. This agreement stated that the two nations would share the technology, but in 1946 the United States betrayed that agreement. They passed a law that cut off all exchange of nuclear information. They wanted to keep the secrets for themselves. The British were shocked. They realized that to remain a world power they needed to do it themselves. They still controlled most of the world's uranium supply, and they had the knowledge. They worked quickly. In 1952, the UK detonated their first bomb called Operation Hurricane off the coast of Australia. They were back at the top of the table, but the game was changing. Bombs dropped on Japan were fission bombs. By the early 1950s, scientists were working on something far worse. They were building thermonuclear weapons. These are also known as hydrogen bombs. Instead of splitting atoms, these bombs fused them together like the energy inside a star. These weapons were hundreds of times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. Scientists like Oppenheimer begged the government not to build them. They warned it would lead to the destruction of mankind, but President Truman ignored them. In 1952, the US tested Ivy Mike. It was the first hydrogen bomb. The Soviets followed in 1955 and the British in 1957. The destructive potential of the human race had just multiplied by 1,000. The fourth country to join the list was France. France had been humiliated during the Suez Crisis and felt pushed around by the superpowers. They decided they needed their own deterrent to ensure they were treated as a great European power. The United States was strong strongly against France having nukes. They tried to discourage it, but President Charles de Gaulle was adamant. He famously stated that nuclear weapons were essential for French sovereignty. France sourced uranium from their colonies in Africa like Madagascar and Gabon. Even though France was still rebuilding from the destruction caused by World War II, their scientists worked tirelessly. In 1960, France drove out into the Sahara Desert in Algeria. They detonated their first device called the Gerboise Blue. The explosion sent a massive message to Washington and the world. France was proving that they no longer needed to hide behind the American military for safety. The fifth country was China. The Chinese wanted a deterrent against the United States. Initially, the Soviet Union helped them. They saw China as a fellow communist ally, but the relationship soured. The Soviet leader Khrushchev began to criticize the legacy of Stalin and sought better relations with the West. The Chinese chairman Mao Zedong thought this was weak. He accused the Soviets of losing their revolutionary spirit. The two nations split, and the Soviets withdrew all their technical help. They left China to figure out rest of the stuff by themselves. China was in the middle of massive internal turmoil with the Cultural Revolution, but they poured resources into the bomb. In 1964, China shocked the world by testing their first atomic bomb at the dried-up lake of Lopnur. Then they did something incredible. Just 32 months later, they tested a hydrogen bomb. This was the fastest any nation had ever gone from a basic fission bomb to an advanced fusion bomb. The sixth country is the most mysterious one on the list. It is Israel. To this day, Israel has never officially admitted to having nuclear weapons. They maintain a policy of total ambiguity, but the world knows they have them. In the 1950s, Israel began building a secret nuclear facility in the Negev desert with help from the French. American spy planes eventually spotted the construction. President John F. Kennedy was very concerned. He demanded inspections. The Israelis stalled and hid their true activities. They built fake walls and hidden elevators to conceal the bomb-making facilities underground. Kennedy died before he could stop them, and his successor Lyndon B. Johnson was much more lenient. By 1967, it is believed that Israel had the bomb. The world got confirmation of this decades later in 1986. A technician named Mordecai Vanunu worked at the secret Israeli facility. He took photos and smuggled them out of the country. He gave the story to a British newspaper, but before the story could be published, the Israeli Secret Service called the Mossad caught up with him. They set a trap. A female agent pretended to be an American tourist in London. She flirted with Vanunu and convinced him to fly to Rome with her for a romantic weekend. As soon as he arrived in Rome, he was drugged and kidnapped and shipped back to Israel. He spent 18 years in prison. His sacrifice confirmed to the world that Israel was indeed a nuclear power. The seventh country was India. India felt surrounded. They felt trapped between two powerful enemies. They had lost a war to China in 1962 and were constantly fighting with their arch-rival Pakistan on the other border. They began a research program using a reactor that Canada had given them for peaceful energy. India claimed they were not building a bomb, but in 1974 they conducted a test in the desert. They called it a peaceful nuclear explosion. The code name was Smiling Buddha, and the world was not amused. Canada and the US imposed sanctions on India for misusing the technology. India paused for a while, but officially weaponized their program in the 1990s. They declared a no first use policy. This means they promise never to use nukes unless someone else uses them on India first. The eighth country is perhaps the most unique story of all. It is South Africa. By the 1970s, the South African government was completely alone. The rest of the world hated their racism and refused to help them. They looked at their borders and saw enemies everywhere. Countries right next door like Angola were falling under communist control. They decided that they needed the ultimate insurance policy. They had massive uranium reserves and they used them. In 1979, an American satellite detected a mysterious double flash of light in the Indian Ocean near islands controlled by South Africa. It is widely believed this was a joint nuclear test with Israel. By the 1980s, South Africa had built 6 fully functional nuclear bombs, but then the world changed. The Soviet Union collapsed. The threat of communism faded. The apartheid government knew their time was ending. They were terrified of handing over nuclear weapons to the new incoming government led by Nelson Mandela. So they did something no other nation has ever done. They voluntarily dismantled all their weapons. They destroyed the blueprints and melted down the uranium. So South Africa is the only country to build its own nukes and then give them up entirely. The 9th country was Pakistan. After losing a war to India in 1971, the Pakistani Prime Minister made a famous vow. He said that even if the people people have to eat grass, they will get a nuclear bomb of their own. They could not let India dominate them. The hero of their program was a man named Abdul Qadir Khan. He was a metallurgist working in the Netherlands at a facility that enriched uranium. He used his clearance to steal top-secret blueprints for centrifuges. He memorized designs and copied documents and brought them back to Pakistan. This gave them a massive head start. They also received help from China, who wanted to keep India in check. The United States knew what Pakistan was doing. However, the US needed Pakistan's help to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan, so the Americans turned a blind eye. In 1998, just weeks after India conducted a series of tests, Pakistan responded. They detonated 5 bombs in the mountains. The crowd in Pakistan went wild. They had leveled the playing field. Unlike India, Pakistan has a first-use policy. They reserve the right to launch nuclear missiles if they feel they are about to be defeated in a conventional war. This brings us to the 10th and final country on the list, and that is North Korea. North Korea wanted nukes for the same reason everyone else did. They wanted regime survival. The Kim family believed that without the bomb, the United States would eventually invade them. They started with Soviet help for energy, but eventually went rogue. They signed treaties promising not to build weapons and then cheated on them. They used the designs they bought from Pakistan. In 2006, North Korea conducted its first underground nuclear test. It was a small explosion, and some experts think it was a partial failure, but they kept trying. In 2009 and 2013, they tested bigger bombs. By 2017, they detonated a thermonuclear hydrogen bomb. Today, they have intercontinental missiles that can theoretically reach United States. They are the only country to withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty and successfully build a weapon. These are the 10 nations that built the bomb. But the story is bigger than just them. There are other countries that host nuclear weapons. During the Cold War, the US and the Soviets placed missiles all over the world like chess pieces. Today, American nukes are still stationed in Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey. Russia has recently moved tactical nuclear weapons back into Belarus. The threat is not just from the countries that make them, but also from the countries that hold them. We also have to look at the countries that tried and failed. You might be surprised to know how many nations were close. Argentina and Brazil had military programs that they abandoned. Sweden and Switzerland considered it, but the most volatile region has always been the Middle East. Iraq had a nuclear program under Saddam Hussein. In 1981, Israel launched a daring air raid called Operation Opera. They bombed the Iraqi reactor and destroyed it. In 2007, Israel did it again. They bombed a secret facility in Syria that was being built with North Korean help. The current worry is Iran. Iran has been enriching uranium for years. Israel and the West have tried to sabotage and slow them down. There is another country that's often overlooked. Japan is what experts call a threshold state. Japan has advanced rocket technology and huge stockpiles of plutonium from their energy reactors. Experts believe Japan could build a nuclear weapon in a matter of months if they wanted to. Currently, their pacifist constitution prevents it, but if the geopolitical situation in Asia changes, Japan is ready to flip the switch. Finally, we cannot forget the silent threat that hides in the ocean. The treaties and the inspections focus on land, but the true power of nuclear nations lies in the deep. The US and Russia, and the UK and France and China and India all operate nuclear-armed submarines. These vessels can stay submerged for months. They are impossible to track. They ensure that even if a country is wiped off the map, their submarines can launch a retaliatory strike from anywhere in the world. This is the concept of mutually assured destruction. It is a terrifying logic that has kept the peace for 80 years. The science that started in a laboratory in Germany has now spread to every corner of the map. We have watched the club grow from just 1 member to 10. The technology is old and the blueprints are out there. The only thing stopping the next country is politics and not science. The most terrifying question now is that who will be the number 11?